Thanks for taking time out of your day to be here. Um, I'm just letting a couple people trickle out of the waiting room here. All right, let's get started. Well, thanks everyone for making the time to be here today. I'm going to kick off with some intros of the awesome panel we have here today. This panel is being hosted by Statsig. I'll give a little bit more context on what we want to talk about, but I'm going to do intros first. Um, so first we have Maya. Maya is a product leader at Faire, formerly at Khosla, Front, Uber for 9 years, and also at McKinsey. Um, then we have David. David is head of product at Hims and Hers. He's formerly at Instacart, Thumbtack, Facebook, and McKinsey. And then last, certainly not least, our head of product here at Statsig, MA or Margaret-Ann Seger, formerly at Uber for 6 years, and before that at Facebook and Instagram. I was thinking maybe starting with Maya, could we just go around the room? I'll give you all each a minute to introduce yourself. And I'd also love to hear how'd you end up in product? I feel like everyone has a different story for what that looks like. There's no one path into this career.
Yeah, sure. Well, you gave sort of the resume in terms of the names of the companies that I've worked at. So, have been a product leader for over 10 years now. 9 of those years were at Uber, and then so joined there when it was a Series B company in 2012, only 100 people, and saw it kind of scale up through IPO and beyond. And then after that, dabbled a little bit into VC with Coastal Ventures. Then did the head of product thing at Front, a B2B SaaS platform. And then now I'm at Faire, which is a marketplace that helps retailers, independent retailers, find brands and products to stock in their stores. And I lead the discovery experience there, which is like search, homepage, all that good stuff. In terms of just how I got into product, I originally, way back when, studied math and computational science in undergrad and had done a number of software engineering internships, but I knew it wasn't quite the right fit for me. Like I didn't see myself like coding as my professional full-time career. And so when I was looking at jobs after undergrad, I decided, well, the two places I see a lot of really smart people going are finance and consulting. And I was like, consulting seems more of the vein I want to go than finance. So started in consulting, and while I was in consulting, recognized that like I really did miss the technology that I was working on and building as a coder. And so I felt like this product management thing was this new thing I had heard about. It felt like this perfect blend of building products, but also leveraging some of the strategic aspects that I was learning in at McKinsey. And so I, after that, just started reaching out to small companies in the Bay Area who I thought might take a chance on me as someone who didn't have like formal product management training, wasn't part of an APM program. And Uber was that company that I felt like I really resonated with the product and the value prop and loved what it was doing, especially living in San Francisco where getting a taxi was impossible. And then loved the team and they hired me, and that was the rest is sort of history.
Awesome. Thanks, Maya. Maybe David, do you want to go next there?
Yeah. I wish mine was as elegant and like well thought out in terms of how I ended up in product. I always, like a lot of people, like grew up enjoying working with technology, messing around with things. I didn't study computer science. My coding was, my first job. I automated my work so I could do it in like 10 minutes a week and then spend the rest of the time applying to jobs to get a better job. Um, it took me, that's how I got some gray hair that you can't see right now, because when I worried I wasn't going to get out of there. But I was working in New York, was at McKinsey, in consulting, and got a random email from somebody saying, do you want to come to a dinner with Facebook? And it was an excuse to get out early. And as those of you that have worked in consulting, an excuse to get out early is nice. So I went to my nice dinner, had some good conversations with some people there. I invited a coffee the next morning, showed up, didn't, and then was suddenly thrown into a 20-minute walk around New York interview that I was not prepared for in any way. Did well enough that they offered to fly me out to Palo Alto. and I hadn't lived in California for a while and missed In-N-Out, so I figured I might as well fly out and get some free food out of it. Interviewed, not the best experience. So my third interview never showed up, and I was abandoned in the Facebook offices for an hour and a half until somebody came and rescued me. Engineers nicely kicked me out of the room because they had it reserved. And I remember leaving saying, "There's no way I'm joining this company. This is like really weird. Like I don't get it." And then I realized over time that I enjoy technology, I enjoyed building, and for me, what was exciting was I was really kind of tired of spending all my time making decks and presentations where the goal wasn't actually to solve problems. The goal was to sell the next gig. The goal was frankly like look smart in front of the partner so you get promoted. That was actually the real goal early on in your consulting career. And as MA knows, I'm not really great at the politicking that is big in consulting, or it's probably evidenced by my answers now. And I was really excited to build and solve problems. And I've always really enjoyed that intersection of monetization and technology. Like, how do we solve problems for people where they vote with their wallets? And I've always believed like technology really can sort of move out the efficiency curves and sort of unlock new economies. I studied economics, worked at the Federal Reserve. That's not someone present, and that was really what was exciting to me. I mean, so I joined Facebook the same day as MA, early as an RPM, and that was really an exciting opportunity to get exposed to a lot of different things, figure out sort of what's my niche in the product world, and then ever since then I've sort of been focusing on that problem in different capacities of monetization technology. Many times it's been growth, but sort of a little bit of everything as it's related to building out my career.
Awesome. And last but not least, MA.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to top these two stories. Maya being early Uber, I mean, what an insane time. And David accidentally getting a job during a 20-minute walk and talk in New York. Like, I can't claim that I have either of those on my resume. But my story was honestly very similar to Maya's, where I did a bunch of engineering internships, was studying computer science in school, realized that like, I think I'm just a breadth type person. I'm not a depth person. And I wanted to be able to kind of bop around and see, different aspects of the business, different aspects of the product, work with different teams, get different perspectives. And so when I discovered that there was this thing called product management, having worked with PMs in my engineering internships, I was like, I think this is the thing for me. I'm going to give this a shot. Ended up applying to Facebook in the RPM program. Sounds like I had a much better interview experience than you did, David. I was frankly wowed, by kind of the whole thing end to end. I don't know if you guys were part of that era who like watched The Social Network in college and then had their minds blown. Were like, oh my gosh, tech, like I need to be a part of this zeitgeist. But I was definitely in that boat. And so to me, going to Facebook was like the dream job. So I started in the APM program at Facebook with a bunch of people who are now lifelong friends. And then over time, decided, I really love that super small kind of hustle startup-y experience. And the company that was even smaller than Facebook at the time and kind of growing even faster was actually Uber. And so I joined Uber in 2014, kind of the tail end of that really crazy hypergrowth. Well, not tail end. Hypergrowth continued for a couple of years, but I'd say tail end of the chapter 1 of Uber, which you were fully present for, Maya. And just got to build the international business. So flying all over the world, working to unblock product experience in India, Southeast Asia, Latin America, a lot of payment stuff. Payments ended up being the #1 blocker to people using Uber, to also drivers adopting Uber, and being able to get paid for the rides that they did. So very, very cool experience getting to immerse myself in different cultures and in the context of something as kind of hyper local as transportation, which really does have a lot of nuance all over the world. So that was a phenomenal era, and stayed at Uber for 6 years. And then in 2020, coinciding with the pandemic, had my own identity crisis and decided I was going to move. I was going to leave Uber. I was going to have no plan. And I found myself in Seattle with still no plan, no job, and met the team at Statsig, who were just starting out and building something that resonated with me because I had worked at Facebook, and a lot of the early product was based on kind of Facebook's internal tools for experimentation and feature release. And I said, hey, you know what? I would love to work with you guys. You're smart, you're hungry, you're building something that I know has value, and you're in person, which I really missed. And so joined the team at Statsig and have been here for 3 and change years, just kind of building the business and seeing it go from, I think we had 1 contract when I joined, to now, significant revenue growth, and great logos, working with amazing teams all over the place. So very, very cool journey. I feel very grateful for those opportunities, but excited to hear, from other folks who've had equally cool journeys, what your learnings have been along the way.
Awesome. I promised I wouldn't torture this point in our pre-call, but I believe we have Maya and David, both ex-consultants, and I see we have at least a handful of known consultants in the chat. So I better touch on it briefly. And MA, you're not an ex-consultant, but you did hire an ex-consultant, me. So if you have anything to add on the point, go ahead. But I am curious, and maybe we can start with David. Your background in consulting, if it's influenced you as a PM, if there are things that you think it helped you with, or if there were things that you had to kind of like unlearn going from consulting to PM. No, it was a long time ago, but any thoughts you have?
I mean, I think the answer is yes to both. There's definitely things you have to unlearn and things that help you with. I think the biggest thing with consulting is getting comfortable making decisions without all the data, and being able to present that and communicate that in a clear and effective manner. And I think one of the biggest issues early PMs have is they want all the data. They want, perfect precision to make a call. Thing of Statsig as a product, right? Like it's an experimentation platform. There's plenty of PMs that get stuck by like, is it green? Great, it's green and I can ship it. When in reality, like at least my perspective was like the goal of experimentation is not to size a thing, it's to make a decision. Like, do you have enough data to make an informed decision? And sometimes you can wait for all the data to come in. Sometimes you can't for business strategic reasons. In the early days, as MA was at Statsig, like you definitely can't wait for all the data to come in like you can at Facebook nowadays, where you can power things in minutes. It's just not a reality. So I think being comfortable with imprecise data and that communication is important. I think the things that consulting does spend a lot of time on, though, is the presentation of information, getting the decks right, the emails right. And I think that can matter at bigger companies. I think that's why you see a lot of the bigger companies, there's a lot of ex-consultants, ex-business people now in the product ranks, because there's a presentation layer in that middle management that everybody has their own opinions on that. So I'll say that. But I do think that is something to unlearn, especially at smaller startups and growing, where the presentation layer is not as important. The ability is like, can you get shit done and solve real problems is what matters. And the ability to move forward with partial information is really powerful. Not moving forward because the deck isn't right, this email isn't right, you don't have everything, is the biggest thing that I think consultants need to unlearn, and most do it pretty quickly. I don't know, Maya, I'm curious though, like what resonates from your side.
Yeah, couple things that I think the unlearning, the sort of everything needs to be perfect. And I think the biggest thing I had to learn was how to do the build, learn, iterate cycle versus I think consulting is sort of you're given a project, you come up with a solution, you move on. You don't ever really like go through that iteration cycle. So that was kind of a big thing I had to learn. But I do think that some of the skills around structured problem solving, taking some big ambiguous area that you know nothing about and trying to break it into bite-sized chunks is something that definitely served me well. And then I think some of the like analytical rigor that you learn really helped when it came to like when you're road mapping and you're trying to prioritize and come up with like the business case behind something. And using data to inform those decisions is something that we did it in consulting and that translated really well.
Yeah, that like framework driven approach, I feel like it is like just the ability to like build out an issue tree, break things down in component parts, both like from the data perspective, but then also for like more amorphous problems. It's pretty like pervasive in every product interview, like the execution interview. There's a reason every consultant crushes it. It's literally what they've done for 2 years or 3 years or however long they were in consulting. But I think that's also really key. Like it's very easy to be like, here's an amorphous problem, let's break it down to the root causes. Most consultants crush that, I feel, pretty quickly, and it's actually very valuable at any stage, whether you're early in your career or even like leading product teams.
Nice. Thanks so much for dealing with that question. Moving on, I wanted to give a little bit of context about the questions I'm going to ask for the body of this chat here. So at Statsig, we've been doing a series on modern PM challenges, and some of you might have seen, it might have been how you found this webinar. We published a guide on the modern PM playbook. So I'm going to dive in from here on into the state of the PM profession, get some thoughts from these PM leaders we have here, and then talk about a little bit about strategies that are working for you today or those that aren't working. Yeah. So maybe to kick that off, and how about let's start with MA on this one, then we can go to Maya second. How have you seen the PM profession change in your long storied careers here? And especially if you've seen it change, like any accelerated change recently in the last couple of years, AI and such. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think actually accelerated is kind of the key term. I feel like I'm curious, Maya and David, to get your thoughts on this, but I feel like things have just actually been speeding up. And it used to be that there would be kind of these eras. There'd be a platform disruption, right? So maybe it was like social, then it was mobile and all the apps that unlocked, right? With like marketplaces and on-demand economy. And then it was like crypto. And now with AI, it's almost like just a hyper speed up, right? So all those previous eras, they were a good couple years, right? Where it was almost like there's a platform shift, and then you can build these apps on top of them, and it's going to take 5-ish years to really determine who the winners are in the space. And now it's like, oh my gosh, I just feel like I read an article, I look at LinkedIn, I listen to a podcast every day, and there's some new boundary pushing innovation with AI or a new company that's hit 100 million in revenue. I mean, everyone's seen those iconic curves on LinkedIn, right? Where it's like revenue growth over time, and there's companies hitting 100 million in like months. And it just feels like that is becoming the new norm. And for people that have been in the industry for a while, it's like pretty jarring, honestly. And I have to get, kind of acclimated to the idea that I'm going to constantly be out of date and having to kind of almost play catch up. Whereas it used to be that I felt pretty on top of these trends and the implications of those on our business and the product. And now it's like, whoa, just constant catch up, which is also really exciting, right? It feels like a very cool moment to be in this industry and to be building products. But I think the key is like I've had to get really comfortable with being uncomfortable. So yeah, it's been a shift, but I'm actually pretty excited about it. So I'm curious, Maya and David, how you've seen things shift.
Yeah, when I thought about this question, I thought more a little bit along the lines of like how the role of a product manager maybe has evolved. And I do think that being and understanding the technology as opposed to sometimes you could have outsourced some of that maybe to your engineering counterpart, I think is really critical that product managers are understanding these new technologies in AI and like playing with them because I think in order to build great AI products, like you need to be using it yourself. And then I think the other thing I was thinking about though, in terms of just like how the function has changed, I do think that kind of with COVID and the whole shift to remote work, and everyone I think is dealing with some remote workers, whether you're a completely remote first company or hybrid or even still in person, you still have people around the world. One of the things I see as a result in terms of the product management role is like there's a greater reliance, I think, on written documents, whether it's a strategic narrative or a PRD. And there's a lot of rigor in thinking. You can't rely as much necessarily on like beautiful presentations to like kind of convince a team and the best salesman wins. It's really about the like analytical rigor, I think, is I've noticed kind of becoming more pronounced. And I do think like generative AI is helping incredibly with this, right? So like you can draft something really fast, faster than ever with LLMs. You also now have this incredible tool to use as a brainstorming partner to help you come up with better frameworks or pressure test where are the holes in what I'm seeing. And so I feel like the speed of getting to clarity, which is, fundamentally what a product manager is trying to do, is happening way faster.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that's said. I think there's also a little bit, and maybe it's the product side of like seeing where it's going versus where we are today, and there's still like that gap, right? I think everybody's like, oh, it'll be great when you're in a world where you can clearly define a problem, input it into something, that'll automatically understand your code repo, develop the code, deploy it, you can test it, and the engineers can spend time on like the core architecture, the principles, like the core like deep engineering problems, and we can sort of move that gap from like product and design to like real user experience and compress that. And I think everybody wants that and sees that. And I don't know, maybe some companies are there yet. I don't think most companies are there yet. I don't think anybody is like taking a PRD, throwing it into Cursor and be like, I'm done. I can ship it to production right now. What I do see is like over time, as PM sort of as a profession sort of exploded a bit, you ended up with like a lot of PMs that were almost more like project managers and got stuck in that middle of like getting really good at getting shit done, but didn't spend enough time, I think, Matt, your point, like understanding the technology, building the craft, the experience, and really having a unique perspective on like, is this a problem we're solving, and how do we think we should solve it? And like, I do think that the people that can just get things done through execution, there's always some value for that. But like, if it's more of like in that more project management style mode, I think that's going to go away over the next couple of years, and it's starting to already. Because frankly, a lot of the core things that I mentioned, like drafting the right PRDs, bringing all the right context, and that can and is being automated. It's really fast, and every new sort of base model generation makes that, frankly, an order of magnitude better for a PM. I also think, I know there's questions like the super IC, like the ability for people to kind of know what you want to do and really express that and get it in the right formatted outputs to be able to move forward is much faster. I know some people might anime, but there are times where I'm like, I kind of know what I need to build here. Like I know the answer, but like I don't necessarily have a few weeks to like put together the right PRD, get all the like. I can kind of throw that into Cursor, play with the latest Claude models, and I'll get a pretty decent first shot PRD with some tweaking. You're like, I think that's what we should build. I think that's how we should evaluate it. And here's my open questions. Can we run with this over the next week and move forward? And that is, I think, something that is powering, where in the past you just needed people to work and get the shit done. And over time, it's going to be easier to get more things done with fewer people. And the focus is going to be more like, do you know the right things to work on? And are you really able to express that as efficiently and cleanly as possible? I'll say there's a lot of noise now in MA's point. There's just so, like, because of mobile and social and all that, there's so many people out there just throwing noise. And every time I dig in, there's like, how do you really understand, like, what is this? What's the so what of what's being put out there? Like, everybody's like, you have to be great at evals now to be a PM in the future. It's like, what really does that mean to be great at evals? And it's like, the right tools and stuff. Like, forget all the tools. Tools change all the time. What does it mean to evaluate something that has a probabilistic outcome at the end of the day? Like, and like, what is that going to look like? There's a lot of these other things. Like, what does it mean to be agentic first? What does it mean to, like, and I think there's a lot of people that get stuck in the tools and the approaches as PMs now. And that was a thing in the past. Like, you got to use this, this, and this. And really getting back to that core focus of a PM is like, what is the problem I'm trying to solve? What is the right way to solve it? And then how does the technology help support it versus getting stuck on the technology?
David, I feel like you touched on one there, which is project management, but I'm curious if you, and maybe we'll start with David and then we can bounce over. If there are skills you think that PMs have that'll be durable to the AI sort of transition in the next few years of PM, and what those skills are that they should be focusing on developing.
Just really understanding the problem you're solving. And that can be customer centric, infrastructure. Like, do you understand the problem? That I think great PMs, it's not using a data source, right? Like, there's PM, I think, and this thing you learn over your career, but it's like, it's not just about the data that you can see. It's not just about qualitative interviews. It's not just about markets. Like, how do you take all the different data points, synthesize it, and be able to deliver sort of a perspective that is unique? If all you're doing is taking data, running them, roughly running a model, like, yeah, that's going to go away. But that's not what great product management looks like. It's being able to take all these things, have a perspective, and have a unique perspective. Maybe 5 people end up with a similar unique perspective. That's not, nothing, not everything has to be completely off the wall, but being able to bring that together, I think that is one thing that is needed, because that's going to inform how you're using all the technology out there to deliver an experience. I think the ability to communicate clearly and effectively. I think I'm not a great writer, probably not shocking given how I talk, but I'm not a great writer. I think that's going to, like, the ability to need to be a great writer will be supplemented, but the ability to communicate clearly, and what that means is knowing what matters to communicate, what doesn't, and how you want to structure that is going to be increasingly clear, because when there's such an ease, almost like zero marginal cost of creating content, the ability to sort of synthesize that and bring that down is going to be crucial to make sure that you're focusing time, energy, attention on the right things. And I think that's a big product skill. And then lastly, I think the prioritization is going to continue to be incredibly important. Because if you know the right problems and you communicate it, knowing what to work on, what's not to work on. When you can do everything, and at times it feels like, guys, why don't we do everything? I can vibe code this, throw that together. Like, we can just do everything. You really can't. Like, you can't, customers can't necessarily take that all at once. They can't experience it. You can't make sure the quality is there at that release. And I think really knowing what to work on and what's maybe not as important to work on, so you can still move really quickly, but work on the right things, is going to be incredibly important. Things that won't, I think, be as valuable is like being able to write a weekly status update, run the meeting, like run a sprint plan, being really good at writing PRDs very quickly. I'm like, well, yeah, like being able to craft it like that. So that stuff that is my like, that's going to be more automatable over time. And I think a lot of people get stuck in thinking that's the job of a PM. and not the other parts. That's how you express what you're trying to do as a PM today, but that's not the job of the PM.
Yeah, I think
You
just
know?
adding on to that, just the problem and user understanding is like so incredibly important. And I think we have better tools to do those things, but there still is an element of judgment that is required when you take all of that input and you're being really critical about, okay, which of these is the most important? How do I prioritize those? And to your point, like, yeah, you could get distracted and do a whole bunch of things, but trying to figure out which one is the most important that's going to like actually change the trajectory and outcome for your customer and for your business is the part that is most critical to continue honing your skills on.
Yeah, to add on to that, I mean, I think human empathy is like fundamentally tough to teach a machine. And so it's going to be interesting to see how, you're pairing with AI almost as a teammate, but how are you conveying all this context of the user and the customer pain point and like get it to feel that empathy in the same way you do? Like that's tough, right? And I think that's ultimately going to be the bridge that PMs have to, um, the gap they have to bridge. And so I think that's an interesting prompt in the future is like, how are you going to teach your AI teammate empathy for your customer? Um, Another thing that I actually think is going to be really important for PMs is the PMM or marketing, like go to market mindset, right? The AI can write your code, it can help you with the PRD, it can help with the execution, but you still then have to get this thing in front of users. And you need to, figure out how it's going to land in the market, how it's going to be positioned, why it's going to stand out from the other products in the market, and how it's going to resonate with your customers. And so that skill set actually feels like it's going to really become a part of the PM's role as the full stack product owner. And it's something that like is actually really hard. I always come back to the quote that my husband and I were talking when he was winding down one of his companies. And he said, first-time founders care about product, repeat founders care about distribution. Because you learn that ultimately your company and your product dies on the distribution hill. So I think figuring out, bridging the empathy gap and distribution, go-to-market strategy, like really that marketing muscle is going to be increasingly important.
I really like this theme of getting deep, really digging into what the problem is. And I want to spend another minute on that. I'm curious for the whole panel here if any of y'all have a story about having to dig really deep to find out what the actual problem was, and then also how you knew when you solved it or found that problem.
I feel like MA has better stories on this from when I think of the Uber international stuff, but I don't have to run to the bus.
I have one. I can start us off. So this is actually an interesting one because it's a double click on the problem and then it's a double-edged sword on the solution. So on the problem side, we were looking at, this was kind of like early days international growth. We were looking at rider kind of onboarding and drop off in the funnel in India. And we saw that people all made it to the payment screen and then bounced. And we thought, okay, people don't want to enter their credit card. This is friction, they're worried. And so we said, okay, well, let's make this easier, right? So we reduced the friction, no movement. Then we said, okay, maybe people just don't have credit cards. So we did some Googling and turns out, only at that time, 2% of people in India actually had access to a credit card. So we said, okay, that's a problem we should solve. Let's add more digital payment methods. And there was a company, Paytm, that was a digital wallet coming up at the time. We said, great, we'll add support for that. And Airtel, which is a big telco, had a wallet, and we'll just add all these digital wallets, and then people will have non-credit card options. We did all this, barely moved the needle. And then we just said, you know what? Maybe the issue is actually cultural. So we double clicked on talking to a ton of people, and everyone kind of came back with the same answer that was, hey, we just want to pay in cash. Like when you get a cab, you just want to pay with cash. That's the standard. I don't want to, input something in prepay until the services have been rendered. I want to pay after the services have been rendered. And so all the data digging in the world and all the kind of logical conclusions of let's just increase our digital, payment strategy footprint, none of that actually led to any outcome. We were kind of climbing this molehill while there was a mountain next to us. And it took really talking to people and, like I said, bridging that empathy gap to understand that that was the core issue. So here's the back end of that. So we built support for cash payments. Huge unlock, like immediately overnight, a ton of, kind of the top of funnel opened up. Onboarding funnel looked amazing. India growth was unlocked. And so we started to scale this to other regions that had, heavily cash-based economies at the time. So moved, into Southeast Asia, opened up cash as a payment method, went great. Moved to LATAM, opened up cash as a payment method, went great. And then suddenly in Brazil, we started noticing that there were a lot of safety incidents. There was a huge spike in safety incidents, and we couldn't figure out why. And then we kind of tracked it back to corresponding to the launch of cash. Turns out when you don't have to link a credit card, you didn't have any kind of digital identity linked to the platform. And so it was very easy to kind of anonymously spin up an account, request a driver to come to you, and then rob them, which is super, super scary and was something that was like deeply upsetting. And we kind of immediately said, okay, great, we're going to lock this down. This is not okay. Shut down cash. But at some point, you have this fundamental tension of how do we open up access to something that's really important like transportation while still protecting drivers and ensuring that, they're able to operate on the platform safely. And so there was a whole follow-on work stream of like, and Maya, actually, I think you worked on this at points in time, like, having additional rider verification and identity verification processes and ensuring safety through other mechanisms that, yes, introduced friction, but ultimately enabled us to kind of exist in this world where we were both able to serve riders and drivers. So it's funny how like, all these different inputs, data, human understanding, talking to people, like understanding human behavior, they all end up kind of combining to reach this end solution, and that end solution might look different in different places. So yeah, I would definitely say that was like a triple click problem, and it actually just kept evolving over the course of many years. Yeah.
Maya, David, anything to add?
I've definitely got stories, but a lot of them tend to be Uber ones. And so I'm like, don't want to make this all Uber. So I was like, maybe David will share something that's not Uber.
I don't think I have anything that's as deep and like as multifaceted as one of the. I mean, I kind of had heard versions of that before, so that's why I had a guess of where it was going with cash payments. I think in terms of thinking a slightly different maybe spin on it is I was running growth at Instacart during when COVID hit, which was like an interesting thing. On the good side, we hit all our goals within a week. But what was really interesting was really trying to understand like what matters deeply. And what was unique is like a lot of the normal things you could do as a PM, like just go talk to customers, like you couldn't do anything because the entire system was different. So really, when you think about getting deep into like understanding the problem, became very much of heavy dogfooding of the product across the country because being sort of a local marketplace, you wanted to internally collect data on like what's working, what's not working. So things that we realized was like just let people schedule groceries as far as they can. Forget it used to be a week, then it was 2 weeks, and it was 3 weeks. Just like let people schedule out further. And that on the marketplace team put a lot of onus on like how do you actually balance marketplace scheduling weeks out? The customer is easy to add a date picker. That part's trivial. But that was a massive unlock when you're like it was more like I'd say like anecdotal data, but we started seeing that in the system of like everything's booked up. People just keep adding it. How do we make it more shoppers? Like shoppers was the number one thing. What are we hearing from shoppers? What are the problems to solve for shoppers? And it was like everything from the usual marketplace onboarding funnel of like, oh, you need to do background checks. Every courthouse is closed. How do you run a background check? Can you do digital identification, digital payment? So there's a lot of interesting things of how do you uniquely go through every part of the funnel, understand every part that's broken from the data perspective, but then tie it to your own personal experience of dog fooding and QA, and then validate that that's not anecdotal, that is actually representative of the experience. Because there's so many things going on, sometimes that anecdotal experience of just dogfooding something and be like, that seems broken, can we fix it, was a great way to cut through the noise versus, well, let's spend some time, let's do some understand work, let's go deep. Like you don't have the time for that. And just using the product was many times faster and help really focus. Like, I think these are the 3 problems you need to go after today, and turn after that.
Nice. I wanted to ask next, you're all now pretty senior in your career, and what I'm hearing is like staying close to the customer. That's vital. How do you manage to keep doing that as you now have teams and you're maybe not the one interfacing directly with them? Stay close to the customer. Maybe let's start with Maya on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think, even as a leader, it is incredibly important to stay close to the customer, even if you're not necessarily directly responsible for like working on that PRD with an engineer. At the same time, you need to have the context of the customer in order to figure out the right strategy for your area to help like guide and coach people on your team. So incredibly important in terms of like ways and kind of some of the tactics I employ to do that. Like one is a lot of people have some sort of pulse survey or it's the app store feedback or whatever that is. Like we have Chattermill. So we are constantly kind of getting a stream of feedback from customers in that written form. And like I make sure periodically, like every week or so, I take a minute to like go and read through just to kind of get that pulse. Another thing is just like simply going, depending on what your business is, like actually talking to the customers themselves. So with Faire, it's pretty amazing that I can just walk down the street, find a retailer, walk into a store, understand their context that they're working in and using my product in, and go and have a conversation sometimes with someone or working with my research team and scheduling those conversations. I'm also next week going to a trade show where I see how brands are representing themselves and how retailers are going to interface. And I actually reached out to a number of retailers, found a couple who are going to the trade show, and I'm going to be shadowing them just to see kind of how discovery works in a different channel through their eyes. So I think it's something for you. It's very important as a leader to do your product, to do your job well, to go and be talking to your customers and also like to set a good example for the rest of the people on your team that they shouldn't be building in a vacuum. They should at times talk to customers, especially sometimes when you're in the early innings of a product and like you're not going to have any data necessarily because it's something new. The best way to make sure you're at least on the right track is to just have a couple of those quick conversations with a customer. So something that I practice all the time and am very conscious of, how is my team also staying in touch with our customer?
Maybe MA, if you have anything on that as well.
Yeah, we kind of do it organically by enforcing on-call. So we as a company actually don't have like a dedicated support team for our customers. We do all of our own support distributed amongst teams. Brock knows this well. He spends probably 3/4 of his day answering SDK Slack questions. But it's cool because basically teams are responsible for talking to customers and supporting them on their own product surfaces. And within those teams, we have kind of an on-call rotation set up. So I'm part of the on-call rotation. I will, be on call next Wednesday, I think, if anyone wants to hit me up with hard questions. But yeah, it's really humbling because what you realize is you're directly having to kind of see where the product breaks down for people and where the friction points are and what's, confusing, and then solve those problems. And it very organically helps, build the empathy, but also then inform the roadmap, and inform product direction because you're not only solving point problems, but actually starting to develop intuition around the themes of where people are getting blocked. So I really, really like that. I think that when I first heard that that was how we ran support, I was kind of like, whoa, how is that going to scale? And frankly, it's not scalable, right? Like at some point we will have to figure out how to really scale this. We've actually used AI a lot here to help with the triage and all the bots to ping the right folks and send it to the right feedback channels and auto create linear tasks and do all these things that just ease the ease of use for on-call. But yeah, that's kind of how we do it. And it's really effective.
David, anything else to add on that one?
No, I like that's interesting. I'm intrigued. I like the Statsig approach. Sounds fascinating. I mean, Hims and Hers is a little bit interesting because it's medical related, so you can't really just like talk to customers, because that'd be weird, right? If you think about it, like why are you getting random pings from like a product team? Like why do you know what medication I'm on? So we want to protect that. Like there's a clear reason that we want to keep, do you need to de-identify data for many product use cases, and you want to keep PHI information separate. So there is like, user interviews and people can chat, and like obviously as a product leaders, making sure you're staying close to that. I think to MA's point around the marketing, actually staying very close to sort of the product marketing, competitive landscape, what's going on, trend. If a lot of your people are jumping on something right now, like there's probably a there to understand more deeply. And then I still think dog fooding is really important, using the product. I just think it's underrated. The amount of people that I think because you're busy, you're doing a million things and it's hard. And sometimes you're like, oh, I can't use the product. Maybe it's as you're like, well, I can maybe run an experiment. But like, I'm working the SDK. How do I like use the SDK right now? Like, it can be hard, right? So I like that sort of on call. Maybe it's a different way to it. Maybe at Faire, it's hard. Like, I don't have a side business that I can suddenly use and set up Faire for. But as much as you can, figure out ways to actually use the product and do it. Because like at the end of the day, enterprise tech, they're people using your product. Like there's a person at the end of the day that's configuring that you're engaging with, and you're a person. So like, you know, if you find something weird there, that's a great way to build empathy, and all the little things and those little nits are things that sometimes you only experience going through the flow.
Awesome. I want to stay on this theme of how you've scaled as you've got more senior. My next question's around how do you align your teams on the outcomes that you want as you're further and further from the problems that they're solving? Yeah, how do you make sure they're working towards the right outcomes? Maybe let's start with David here.
I'll just for that. I don't think there's like the right way to design an org or do this. I think everybody spends. I mean, there's a reason that I feel like teams end up reorging very frequently in product roles, because everybody's like, oh, this one isn't working. And like, there's a belief that the new reorg will ship in, and they're just like, no, it never solves it. I mean, I think there's three parts of it. One, I just believe like, how do you align cross-functional teams? Like, you know, ideally you want pods of teams that are working on the same thing, but towards problems, right? They're all working on the same problem space. So if they're working in the same problem space and they have the right direction and then the right metric where possible, or the clear like strategy and ship markers, that comes a great way of sort of aligning that you can still, whether you're looking at the metric, the ship goals, and stay aligned. Because like if we're working towards that problem, we're all aligned where we're trying to get to, then this becomes sort of the iterative touch points. And personally, I'm like, I want weeklies or bi-weeklies with those teams so I can check in. And if I need to get in the details, I can get in the details. But if not, I can sort of know where we are, interject where I can be valuable, and get out of the way when I know I'm just going to be overhead. So I think there's that aspect on the problem aspect. I think being really clear on what you can measure and what you can't measure, and not trying to add data, like add measurement just for measurement's sake. I think a lot of times I made this mistake. You're like, we need a metric, we got to measure this. And you can only measure, you can't measure everything. There are things you can't measure, and sometimes being okay, like I can't measure this, but like I have a strong belief that this will move long-term retention. I can't measure long-term retention in a 3-month period, and I don't have maybe the best predictive metrics at this point in time. Let's look at the right milestones or ship goals or set for progress because of X, Y, and Z. So being really clear on like how you're going to measure and judge success. And then 3 is the people. The only way you stay confident that you're building the right things and staying aligned is if you're hiring the right people and putting them in the right roles. And I think that is the hardest part of the job, at least for myself as you move up, is most people, the more you're in product, at some point you were like probably a pretty good IC and pretty good at your job. And it was easier because you were in control of your own domain and remit. And the hardest thing is letting go of control and putting somebody else there. And you want to hire somebody better than yourself. But I think that is the biggest adjustment, is like, how do you find the right people that you trust even more than you trusted yourself to run at it? And that is, I think, really the only thing that truly scales, having the right people at every sort of node in that design, in that organizational design, that you can trust are aligning to the right metrics, the right problems, are going to really have that ownership mentality to pull the ball forward.
Nice. Maya, would you like to share next?
Yeah, I think I agree with a lot of those points that David raised. I think org and figuring out a structure that's aligning kind of your teams to the priorities and the problems for the customer or the jobs to be done, and making sure each team sort of has a clear mission and metrics that they can use to help assess whether they're making progress on that mission. I think that's incredibly important. But then also the people is just like the most important part of that, because there's still always a judgment component to this. You can kind of outline the problem space generally, but then they have to assess and judge like how best to solve it, and is it really worth solving sometimes? And so the process also does matter a little bit, of like, how do you as a leader sort of stay involved and understand like what is the cadence of sort of getting updates so that you're getting some of the information that they are getting as well, so that you can kind of provide a little bit of a higher overarching view of things and provide that feedback. So like updates is one thing, as well as like having whether it's a design crit or an office hours sort of forum, so that you can see and kind of understand the decisions being made and see the progress, and make sure that you feel like the right amount of analytical rigor is sort of happening along the way.
Yeah, the only two things I'll add here, because these are really great frameworks. We're still small enough that I can do a couple unscalable things, but they end up really helping. First is we actually start every Monday with a weekly product meeting. So the whole team sits down together and talks. And it's oftentimes not even super structured. It's mostly what's top of mind, what's going on in the business or with customers or with our teams. And that just provides good visibility across the team and selfishly good visibility for me. Um, Second touch point is I started a weekly product review with our CEO. And the original impetus here was let's give, our CEO more visibility into what's happening. But what's actually happened is it actually gives the other PMs and the other team leads visibility into what's happening. And so cool kind of synergy scenarios have started popping up. And I just feel like generally the cohesion and people understanding what the other parts of the org are working on has just increased. And then design crits. Design crits are another great way to do this, where we all want to, have our eyes on the designs. There's a bunch of helpful inputs that come up from other teams who are not, in the problem, in the weeds, thinking about this day in and day out. So just kind of like taking advantage of those opportunities where all the different teams can get together and kind of collaborate cross-functionally, I feel has been really helpful. But again, I'm benefiting from like our scale. And if we were to be, even a Faire size org or a hims and hers size org, it probably would start to break down.
I would admit that I think like too often, like if there are people like earlier in their career managing, there's this desire like I gotta structure, I gotta delegate it. Like doing things that don't scale probably further than they shouldn't scale is really powerful as you move up. Is like, it's just there's both the benefit of you knowing what's going on and being able to help it, but also the coaching and the guidance you're able to give people earlier in their career. It's really hard to grow and upscale and up level your team if you don't really know exactly what they're doing and how they're thinking about things. Because like assuming you've hired smart people and there's good people working there, it's those little things, those little adjustments, and that pattern matching. I think that's really important early on in your career, that especially in remote organizations and other structures, you maybe don't get as much. And I think there's something really powerful about doing those like things that don't necessarily scale like from a traditional org design or structured approach far longer than they should.
And the benefit of more junior PMs getting to see the more senior PMs in action and kind of learn organically. That's really powerful.
Yeah, I think also you sort of have to scale the subscale things in a sense where it's like if your org is so big that that meeting with all of your product managers is getting unwieldy, maybe you need to figure out how to subdivide your company a little bit. And so at Faire, we have 4 different pillars, which are these groups of areas. And so within my pillar, I also have like a PM meeting where all the PMs get together and sort of share what's top of mind. And there's this organic, cross-pollination of ideas that's happening, as well as like discovery of collaboration points. So I think even as you get bigger, you take those subscale things and maybe just have them, in different parts of the org, but you should still keep doing some of those things.
I aspire to need to solve that problem. Hopefully we get there.
Okay, last question I wanted to cover before we get into some audience Q&A. All 3 of you come from these product cultures focused on experimentation and intelligent failure, trying things, see if they work. I'm curious how you promote that now as leaders in the teams you manage, how that works where you work today. Maybe let's start with MA. How about?
Yeah, I mean, we actually have this like on posters on the wall. I don't think the posters behind me have it, but we have this phrase like basically ship it before it's done, which is meant to be a more inflammatory version of done is better than perfect. It's meant to evoke that like literally you're shipping something before it feels good. It should kind of feel a little rough and a little painful. And I like to channel that because then it's like the idea is you get it out there, you get feedback, you can kind of learn that it's either going to work or not work really fast. The extreme of this, which I really like, is one of the PMs on our team recently launched a product that they hadn't built. And they recorded a demo video using the Figma mock and kind of put it out on LinkedIn and said, hey, we're thinking, about doing this. Here's this product. Let us know if you want the early beta access. And a ton of customers reached out. They actually were like, yeah, we want this. We want this. Da, da, da. And so then the team was like, oh, we have to build this. Okay, great. We're going to build it. But that was cool because it was basically like, we're going to save a ton of time. If no one bites, we're not even going to bother. And so I, kind of am channeling that energy, which like honestly is a little chaotic and like could backfire. But in cases where it is a big investment and you're not sure if you should make the jump, I think doing creative workarounds like that actually is pretty clever.
I'll add on to that. So I think a big part of the sort of, ship it before it's ready is like pushing to figure out what is that like most minimal viable thing that you can actually launch. And so that's something that I'm constantly kind of pushing with my teams, which is like, can the scope be smaller? Can we get it out sooner? And so then you're getting that learning from putting it out there and then developing the next phases of it with that learning. And then sometimes another thing we'll do is like, we will put something out there that we know is not the right solution, but we're launching the experiment kind of purely for the sake of learning. And like, let's just see what happens if we put this. So whether it's like kind of a placebo button or something, or something that maybe has a little bit of fake data, because actually putting the real data is going to take a whole bunch of time to make it really, work properly. And so putting something out there as like a bit of a test to see if it actually makes a difference, and then going and building it the right way is another way to sort of get the insight before actually having to ship the whole thing.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with everything you said. I think, I mean, in sort of direct, D2C or, B2C is like, it's a little bit easier to I think, naturally have that culture. I think the biggest thing, if I think also like structurally, is like, how do you create an environment where failure is okay? On the product team, I think a lot of PMs naturally end up being sort of like insecure overachievers. And there's this desire of like, man, if I'm wrong more than half the time, like what's that mean for my review, my rating, my career? Like I gotta have wins. And it's easy to pile up wins if you kind of work on small things don't matter. Because you can have a pretty high hit rate just playing with button colors and like funnel flow conversions. You're not really necessarily going to do that much for the business, but you can definitely get wins. And I think making sure, whether it's from organizational design to structure to the promotion criteria, all those things, is like the goal is not to have a high hit rate. The goal is to solve problems, move the ball forward, and failure is an expected part of that. Failing convincingly is better than sort of a bunch of small wins. And I think that goes a long way. If people know that failure is okay, I think it's many times leads to a lot of those same outcomes that Emmy and Maya talked about moving fast, shipping quickly, not waiting for things to be perfect. I think the only then caveat is sometimes teams go too far and you're like, hey, this is actually just this isn't working because the product you rolled out there sucks. And I think there's that balance of like, painted doors, great. Figured it, great. If you're like, this actually isn't complete and isn't going to work, we're not actually solving the core problem yet, and understanding and getting really good on like, what is that balance? And there have been times I've seen things go out and I'm like, I guess this isn't good. Like, I don't trust the test. I remember at Facebook, there was a idea of like, the perfect execution. And really when it pushed, it was like, it means you trust the test. Like if the test comes back negative, you trust it was negative. And you're not going to be like, well, it wasn't really built. It wasn't the right way. If you're going to not believe your test results, that's too early. The second you'll believe what it tells you, that's the moment to roll it out.
Love that idea. I'm going to pivot to some of the questions we have in the chat here. I'm going to start with one from Kyle. What are some tips and tricks you have to help more junior PMs get comfortable with shipping products that aren't perfect? Maybe we start with Maya. How about?
Yeah, I mean, some of this comes from a little bit of confidence. And when you're earlier in your career, you usually don't have as much confidence. You haven't seen as many things necessarily. And so some of that is having that conversation with them and like trying to understand and unpack a little bit where do they feel like this thing, where are their gaps that they're really worried about? And you kind of have to bring your judgment to it and say like, no, that's like okay. And also be a little bit of the backstop on their decision. Be like, I'm supporting you in launching this, so they don't feel like they're being hung out to dry if it doesn't work out. So I do think like you have to kind of show that you're also supporting them, and that if it doesn't work, like you're going to take some of that blame if there is any sort of blame that they're fearful of. And then like, how do you maintain trust with customers with non-perfect product shows its imperfections? I think there's a multitude of different ways to approach it. And I think there's like, the simplest is like putting beta on something and just like setting the expectations by saying, hey, we're labeling this and letting you know this isn't perfect yet. Other ways can sometimes be where you silently launch something a little bit, where you don't necessarily have the modal that introduces the new feature, and you're kind of just organically seeing what the adoption looks like, and seeing the first few early adopters and then maybe following up with them. So there's kind of ways that you can mitigate when you're launching something that maybe doesn't yet have the the full feature there yet.
Awesome. I'm going to go a little bit lightning mode here. And so I'm going to read a couple questions and then I'm going to call out one person on the panel to answer, if that's okay. Okay, so one from Max. Max says, I agree with what was said that PMs shouldn't be too focused on tools, but great tools also make us do better work. MA mentioned linear. Which other tools, AI or not, really help you be better at your job? And maybe, how about let's go back to MA for that one.
Yeah. So I agree with the premise that they can help or hurt you. I obviously am biased here. I think Statsig helps us do our jobs better. One example is just as a PM, I like to be able to go add myself to features, see what's rolled out or not rolled out, opt myself into different experiences, test things, just get a bird's eye view of what's actually going on without having to ping people and harass them. Um, on the flip side, I would say like Slack's a very divisive tool. I think if used well, it can be really powerful, but I also think it can be really abused and become overwhelming and actually detrimental to productivity. So great use of it I've seen is like, for example, I mentioned our Slack bots that triage and ping people. We also have like kind of feedback channels and stuff like that that work really well. But we recently migrated from Facebook Workplace. This is a whole story. Facebook Workplace to Slack. And one of the things that happened was actually just like complexity and kind of ability to stay on top of things just ballooned because Facebook Workplace is built on Messenger. And Messenger is imperfect. It doesn't have threading, but that actually forces a lot of simplicity and it's much easier to get your head around just like a channel that can only go so far without all these subthreads of subthreads of subthreads. And so, I actually found that transition really tricky. And I think that chat clients in the era of AI are probably ripe for disruption because I think some of us, it helps us, but a lot of us, it also just leads to overwhelm and a ton of parallel threads that cause confusion.
Okay, I don't think we're going to be able to squeeze in any more questions. We've got 1 minute left here. I just
One
wanted
more, Brock. Let's do it.
one more. Okay, one more. Okay, let's go back to David. One question we had asked a couple times was about your process for developing a compelling product vision that your teams can rally behind. It's probably going to be a long one, so give us the short version, David.
I'm glad you saved that for the end and for me. Thank you, Brock. Appreciate that. I think it's really hard. I mean, I think there's two parts of that. Like, how do you develop a compelling product vision, and how do you get people behind it, right? And those ideally would be the same thing, but I think there's, that really, to me, like, it's the three parts. Like, one, going back to what we talked about earlier on, like, do you deeply understand the problem where you're going? And that's really, are you able to try to think about from a macro perspective, whatever industry and where is that trending? What is unique as a company that your advantage is in more of that micro strategy sense of where you uniquely can play within it? And then how do you need to evolve your business, your product, your experiences over time to get to that? And if you can clearly articulate that into something that is, that you believe in, that's probably step one. I think then the next big step is like, how do you enumerate that clearly? And I think that's different almost culturally. Some people are like long form docs, some people are slide based, some people are prototype based. It probably really depends on the company and the culture. So I don't think there's a one size fits all. I think it's really understanding how do people consume information in your company, and then how do you take this idea of like, here's where the company's going, here's where we're uniquely planning, here's where we need to go, and enumerate that. And then third is you really need to understand the people on the other end, right? We talked about convincing your team, executives, whatever. You need to understand, you're talking, it gets back to the product, just like communication, you're talking to people. How do they consume information? Are they very technical and they want to really understand the engineering specs and capacity? Are they more like emotional? They really want to understand how people are going to feel and experience it. Are they rich more marketing? They really want to think more of that like go to market, early PR perspective. It really depends. And that's going to really, I think, inform how you present the information. I've tried a lot of different things. I would say the best way though is do all that work. If you can and you're allowed to, send it to somebody that doesn't work at your company, send it to somebody you don't need to convince, and see if they're inspired. If you send it to your partner, a friend, somebody in a different org, and they're like, man, this is cool, can we build this? Probably done a good job. If they look and they're like, I don't get it, like that seems nice, or you kind of get something they're like, wow, they're being friendly, probably aren't there yet. I do think this is a place where LLMs can be better because you can effectively prompt it and give it different prototypes and be like, just evaluate the hell out of this, be mean. And you'll tend to get pretty, and I think they're actually pretty good because they tend to sort of have more human emotive outcomes and approaches if you prompt it the right way. And they're really good any sort of modality, and really critiquing it and really letting you, by the time you do need to present it, feeling much more confident that you're at least prepared for the feedback that you're about to get.
Awesome. Thank you so much. A special thank you to David and Maya for taking time out of their day to chat with MA and I today. And thanks everyone for attending. If you still want to answer your question, you can join us in the Statsig Slack. MA and I can chat with you there. You can also reach out to me on LinkedIn if you have something specific. If you're interested in Statsig, find us at statsig.com. Thanks so much. Thanks so much for being here. And thanks again, David and Maya.
Thanks, Brock.
Yeah.
Thank you.
See you guys.